What we're going to do now is take a look at the bottom of the page. See those three orange dots? Those three orange bullets, they're going to talk about each one of those three criteria. And I want to learn those so that they start to go here. The first rule of reflection is slow down. Don't get in a hurry. Your lives are complex and you want to fly through because you've got other things to do. But in building this conceptual framework up front, you want to slow down because it actually speeds up things later. You'll actually learn deeper and faster. So we come to this first one. Abnormal behavior is deviant. Well, I've already decided that that's, behavior in which somebody's not acting like how everybody else normally acts. But let's see what it actually says. Abnormal behavior is certainly atypical and statistically unusual. So, deviant behavior is atypical, and statistically, most people are not acting like this, whatever the behavior is. I am not telling you what it said. I am stopping and reflecting and going over in my head so that I am making connections all over my brain. Because when I do what's called internal dialogue, have a conversation, a discussion in my head about what I am learning, I am connecting to huge, vast networks of interrelated information. Instead of just, I am memorizing a definition and there it is, it's just stuck, I got a piece. I've got a neural network that makes it easier to think about all of this stuff. So it's not typical, which means it's not what people normally do. It's not statistical. It is unusual. Unusual, yes. So I continue right here. Oprah Winfrey and LeBron James and Steve Jobs are atypical in many of their behaviors, and yet we do not categorize them as abnormal. Well, it just said they were atypical. My psychiatrist over here, see, this is what she gets all the time. Somebody's behavior is atypical and statistically unusual. They're not behaving the way everybody else is behaving. The person comes in, this is one of the criteria for psychological disorder. Deviant. She's got to decide whether this atypical behavior is something that's a problem. In other words, is it a mental illness? The brain's functioning in a way that results in atypical behavior. See, she thinks all the way back up here. Atypical thinking or atypical interaction. Just watching the interactions within other people and having a discussion, having the person answer a few questions on an inventory sheet, she starts to get a picture of how all of this fits. And so right now, deviant behavior. Apparently there are people who have atypical behavior, but it's not deviant from a psychologist's point of view. It's atypical, but it's not statistically unusual. So let's continue with this. Now, all the things that I said about what I just read in that sentence was not me talking to you. That was me stopping and reflecting and saying what I think about what I understand, where I think this is going and what it's about. Absolutely crucial, because think of all the re-exposure I got on this neural pathway by saying that, and how many connections I might have made. So let's go on. We do often consider atypical behavior abnormal, though when it deviates from what is acceptable in a culture. So if it deviates from whatever is acceptable in a culture, we consider that abnormal behavior. A woman washes her hands 3 or 4 times an hour and takes 7 showers a day is abnormal behavior because her behavior deviates from what is acceptable. That's defined in her books that she has studied. Obsessive compulsive behavior, and it just fits right within all of this. And yes, it is deviant. It's resulting in behavior. There's lots of causes in the brain for why. She may say, well, what's the thinking that's going on? Is it hereditary? Do her parents have it? Is it just her thinking, or did she become anxious about something and this is the way she compensates? Because that's what it'll say about obsessive compulsive behavior. So she's having to think within this framework of things. Well, let's get an example. Anybody in here engaged? Don't do it while you're in school, but don't take my advice. All right. Here's a young woman who just got engaged. And suddenly, she's not eating anything. She's practically starving herself. She's just eating a little bit every day because she wants to fit in that wedding dress the way she has an image in her head. Well, there are all kinds of eating disorders. Her mother's concerned. She sends her to my psychiatrist. My psychiatrist talks to her for a few minutes. Well, this isn't something that's been going on forever. This just happens. I'm getting ready to get married. She makes a decision about whether this is deviant behavior or not, atypical. Have any of you ever heard of young women who get engaged and then right before they got to put that wedding dress on to go down the aisle start starving themselves? Well, everybody in here has. So it's not atypical. Well, it's atypical behavior, what's normally going on, but it's not atypical in terms of that set of information. And we don't think this person's got anorexia or anything else based on that. But she has to check it. She has to ask a number of other questions. This may not be just brand new. This may have just been exacerbated by it. So does everyone have to see she's got to come up and she's got to think within these criteria all the way through, and it's natural for her, and she can go on. So at this point, I've finished that paragraph about deviant. Can I say what it is? Well, it's behavior that's, we've already decided it's not normal. It's atypical, statistically unusual. I won't find very many people in the society doing this. I'm having a conversation in my head. Now, it doesn't seem like I'm doing anything, but it makes all the difference in terms of strengthening whatever I am learning, building the myelin sheath, which speeds up the transmission and processing, so that whatever I learn new about deviant behavior, my brain goes right to it. I don't have to stop and think about deviant. Now, what does deviant mean? I remember reading about that. As an expert in her field, we want her to be able to think like this. Most people graduate not thinking like this. But if you get through this class and you do what we're doing, you will think like this. So now, what you're going to do is you're going to look at the other two criteria. You're going to draw this. When you figure out what it means, stopping and reflecting. I want every sentence, just so we practice stopping it. I want every sentence you to stop. What do I already know about this? Do I understand it? How does it relate to what I read before? How does it relate to each one of these things? So I want you to draw this, add maladaptive to your map, but don't put anything on your map until you can say it in your own words. You stop back, have the reflection. What does maladaptive mean as you're reading through? And when you're through, can you say it in your own words? Then you can put maladaptive here. And one of the things that is very, very powerful, because the brain stores meaning and not sentences. I mean, if you memorize sentences, here's where it goes. But if you store meaning, interrelated meaning, it goes up here. So if you can think about whatever you were just reading about, what words, what has the most meaning? What's a word or two or a short phrase? Well, I get on the board, I can't tie, okay. And not normal. But it also, there tends to be, these things do not necessarily mean that a person has a psychological disorder. They just mean that's one of the criteria you look for. You got it? Thank you. Now.